Desperation has a way of stripping people down to their most dangerous instincts. And in Los Angeles, where power and proximity define survival, Dylan is no longer pretending to be anything other than desperate. Refusing to leave the city despite mounting pressure, public scrutiny, and Ivy Forrester's increasingly hostile demands, Dylan clings to Los Angeles as if departure itself would mean erasure. For Dylan, staying is not simply about geography. It is about identity, relevance, and the refusal to become a footnote in someone else's story. Every attempt to reach Will Spencer in the face of Ivy's opposition becomes an act of defiance. A declaration that Dylan will not quietly step aside just because the rules of this world were not written with outsiders in mind. Ivy Forrester senses the danger immediately. She has lived long enough within the Forrester and Spencer orbit to recognize patterns before they fully take shape. Dylan's persistence does not read as harmless affection or misguided ambition. It feels invasive, destabilizing, and potentially destructive. Ivy's concern is not only for Will, whom she believes is vulnerable to emotional manipulation, but for the carefully maintained balance of power that keeps the family's scandals buried and their public image intact. When Ivy demands that Dylan leave Los Angeles immediately, her tone is not merely protective. It is authoritarian. She speaks from a place of inherited authority, convinced that the Forrester name still carries the power to erase unwanted variables. Yet Dylan does not retreat. Instead, something shifts. What Ivy interprets as stubbornness is, in truth, the final stage of Dylan's transformation from desperate outsider into calculated threat. It is during this fragile standoff that Dylan stumbles upon a secret so destabilizing that it reframes every previous interaction. The discovery is not intentional, not the result of careful investigation, but of proximity, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or perhaps the right place at the exact moment someone else assumed privacy was guaranteed. In a city where secrets are currency, Dylan has accidentally acquired a fortune. The secret itself is not trivial. It does not concern youthful indiscretion or minor moral compromise. Instead, it exposes a grave mistake, or worse, a deliberately concealed act, connected to a senior member of the Forrester or Spencer family. Whether rooted in the past or unfolding in the present, the revelation threatens to dismantle reputations built over decades. It hints at corruption masked as respectability, at choices made in moments of arrogance or fear that could now erupt into a full-scale scandal. For a family whose power depends as much on perception as on wealth, the implications are catastrophic. Dylan's initial reaction to the discovery is disbelief, followed by fear. There is a brief window in which conscience and survival wrestle for control. Dylan understands the magnitude of what has been uncovered and the danger that comes with holding such information. But desperation quickly overtakes hesitation. In Los Angeles, truth is rarely rewarded, and silence is rarely free. Dylan realizes that this secret is not a burden but leverage. The first real power Dylan has ever held in a world designed to keep people like them powerless. When Ivy confronts Dylan again, expecting capitulation, she instead finds resistance sharpened by confidence. Dylan does not deny Ivy's authority outright. Instead, Dylan reframes the conversation entirely. The refusal to leave Los Angeles is no longer emotional or impulsive. It is strategic. Dylan calmly reveals that departure is off the table. Not because of will, not because of ambition, but because Dylan now possesses information that makes exile impossible. The implication lands heavily before the details are even spoken. As Dylan begins to outline the nature of the secret, carefully, selectively, Ivy's certainty fractures. The color drains from her face as comprehension sets in. This is not gossip that can be discredited or buried with legal threats. This is the kind of truth that detonates on contact, the kind that invites investigations, lawsuits, and media frenzy. Ivy understands immediately that any attempt to forcibly remove Dylan from the city could provoke exposure. The power dynamic reverses in a matter of seconds. Dylan does not shout or gloat. The threat is delivered with chilling restraint. If Ivy continues her campaign to expel Dylan, if she attempts to publicly discredit or quietly sabotage them, the secret will be revealed. There is no room for negotiation, no appeal to loyalty or mercy. Dylan makes it clear that survival now depends on Ivy's silence and compliance. For the first time, Dylan is not asking for permission to stay. Dylan is dictating terms. Ivy is stunned into paralysis. Years of experience navigating family crises have prepared her for many scenarios, but not this one. She is accustomed to wielding power, not being held hostage by it. The realization that her hands are tied, by fear rather than law, forces Ivy into an unbearable position. Acting against Dylan could destroy the family she has spent her life protecting. Doing nothing allows a perceived threat to entrench itself deeper into Will's life and the family's inner circle. Either choice carries devastating consequences. Dylan senses Ivy's hesitation and exploits it. No longer merely tolerated, Dylan demands acceptance, not affection, but presence. The pursuit of Will continues openly now, no longer hidden behind apologies or reassurances. Dylan's confidence grows, not because Will has changed, but because opposition has been neutralized. Ivy's silence becomes tacit permission, and Dylan uses it to solidify a place within the Forrester and Spencer orbit that would have been unthinkable days earlier. The secret remains buried, but its weight distorts every interaction. Ivy becomes hypervigilant, watching Dylan not as a nuisance but as a loaded weapon that could discharge at any moment. Conversations grow tense, silences lengthen, and trust erodes quietly. The family senses a shift even if they cannot name it. Something is wrong, something unspoken is poisoning the air, and no one knows where the rot began. Dylan, meanwhile, understands the fragility of this new power. Leverage is only effective as long as it remains credible, and credibility requires constant pressure. Subtle reminders replace overt threats. A glance held too long, a carefully phrased comment, an implication dropped at precisely the wrong moment. Each serves to reinforce the unspoken agreement. Dylan is no longer merely surviving in Los Angeles. Dylan is reshaping the emotional and political terrain of the Forrester and Spencer families. Will finds himself increasingly caught in the crossfire without fully understanding why. Ivy's behavior toward Dylan shifts from aggressive to guarded, creating confusion and suspicion. Dylan's presence feels less like coincidence and more like inevitability. Yet no one explains why resistance has evaporated. The tension manifests in fractured conversations, unresolved arguments, and a sense that decisions are being made elsewhere, beyond Will's control. The secret's continued concealment creates a pressure cooker effect. Every public appearance, every family gathering, every business decision carries the risk of exposure. Ivy lives in constant fear that one wrong move could trigger catastrophe. The family's power, once a shield, now feels like a liability. The very systems designed to protect them, privacy, influence, wealth, become tools Dylan can weaponize if necessary. What makes the situation truly dangerous is not Dylan's willingness to expose the truth, but the possibility that Dylan may not need to. Secrets have a way of surfacing on their own, especially when too many people begin to sense that something is being hidden. Ivy knows that even perfect compliance may only delay the inevitable. Yet delay is all she can afford. In this new equilibrium, Dylan stands transformed, not into a villain driven by malice, but into a survivor shaped by neglect, desperation, and opportunity. Ivy is forced into a role she despises, one defined by inaction and fear. Will becomes collateral damage in a battle he never agreed to fight. And the Forrester and Spencer families, unaware of the exact nature of the threat, begin to feel the tremors of a scandal waiting to be unleashed. The tragedy of this storyline lies in its inevitability. No one emerges unscathed when secrets become currency and affection becomes leverage. Dylan's hold on Los Angeles is temporary, but the damage inflicted by silence and coercion will linger long after the truth finally surfaces. In the bold and the beautiful, power is never stable, and every secret eventually demands payment. The only question left is who will pay the highest price when Dylan decides that survival is no longer enough. Once the secret is weaponized, nothing in Los Angeles feels accidental anymore. Every interaction acquires a second meaning. Every silence becomes suspicious, and every smile carries the possibility of calculation. Dylan understands this instinctively. Survival has sharpened perception, and power, however fragile, demands constant reinforcement. Remaining in the city is no longer about defiance alone. It is about maintaining equilibrium in a system that now depends on Dylan's discretion as much as it resents it. Ivy Forrester's shock does not dissipate with time. It settles into something colder and far more dangerous: vigilance. She becomes hyper-aware of Dylan's movements, tone, and proximity to Will Spencer. Not because she can act against them, but because inaction requires monitoring. Ivy's authority, once unquestioned, now exists in a state of suspended animation. She cannot issue ultimatums. She cannot leverage family influence. Any aggressive move risks triggering exposure. And Ivy knows better than anyone how unforgiving public scandal can be, especially when it implicates a senior Forrester or Spencer figure whose reputation underpins multiple empires. The psychological toll is immediate. Ivy begins to second-guess her instincts, replaying every conversation with Dylan for hidden signals of escalation. Sleep becomes elusive, not from fear of what Dylan might do next, but from the realization that control has slipped through her fingers without a public confrontation. Without a visible battle she could at least fight. This quiet defeat is humiliating, and humiliation breeds resentment. Dylan, meanwhile, calibrates visibility with care. Too much presence invites suspicion, too little invites challenge. The strategy becomes one of normalization. Dylan remains close enough to will to signal persistence, but not so close as to provoke immediate backlash. The pursuit of will shifts tone, transforming from overt longing into steady familiarity. Conversations feel casual, shared moments appear incidental, and affection is framed as mutual comfort rather than intent. This subtlety is deliberate. Dylan understands that the most dangerous advances are the ones that appear organic. Will senses the change, though he cannot articulate it. Ivy's sudden restraint confuses him more than her earlier hostility ever did. Dylan's confidence, once tinged with desperation, now feels grounded, almost assured. The contrast unsettles him. Where there was once friction, there is now an uneasy calm, and Will begins to suspect that decisions are being made around him rather than with him. This realization introduces a quiet anger, one that Will does not direct outward but carries inward, questioning his own agency within a family that has always claimed to protect him. The secret itself remains unnamed, yet its presence distorts the atmosphere within the Forrester and Spencer households. Meetings feel heavier, conversations stall just short of candor. Senior figures become guarded, not because they know the truth, but because they sense instability. Power structures, once fluid, begin to stiffen defensively. Trust erodes not through revelation, but through anticipation. Ivy's greatest fear is not that Dylan will expose the secret, but that someone else will stumble into it independently. The longer the truth remains buried, the more vulnerable it becomes to accidental discovery. Ivy understands this paradox intimately. Secrecy requires fewer witnesses, not more. Yet Dylan's continued presence increases the number of variables she cannot control. Every additional day Dylan remains in Los Angeles feels like borrowed time. Dylan exploits this tension with precision. There is no need to restate the threat. Silence itself becomes the message. A carefully timed remark about how fragile reputations can be, a casual observation about the way the media devours legacy families, a passing comment about how easily old stories resurface. Each lands with surgical accuracy. Ivy hears them all. She responds with forced neutrality, knowing that any visible reaction would confirm Dylan's leverage. As weeks pass, Dylan's position solidifies. What began as survival evolves into influence. Invitations follow. Opportunities arise. Resistance fades. The Forrester and Spencer families, masters of optics, begin to treat Dylan not as an intruder but as a tolerated constant. This shift does not reflect acceptance, it reflects fear. And fear, once normalized, reshapes behavior more effectively than loyalty ever could. The emotional cost intensifies for Ivy, who now finds herself complicit in a lie she despises. Protecting the family means enabling the very presence she believes endangers it. Each time she watches Dylan interact with Will without interference, Ivy feels the weight of compromise settle deeper. The Forrester name has survived countless storms, but this one feels different. Not because of its scale, but because of its intimacy. The threat is not external. It lives inside their walls. Dylan's internal conflict does not vanish with power, it mutates. Control brings relief but also paranoia. The secret must be guarded as carefully as it is wielded. Dylan understands that leverage evaporates the moment it is overused. Restraint becomes essential. There are moments, rare but significant, when guilt surfaces. When Dylan questions whether survival justified coercion. Those moments never last. Los Angeles does not reward hesitation. And Dylan has learned that remorse is a luxury reserved for people with options. Will remains the emotional axis around which this entire conflict turns. Even as he remains largely unaware of the mechanics driving it. His connection with Dylan deepens not through grand gestures but through shared vulnerability. He confides confusion about Ivy's behavior, frustration with being managed, and exhaustion from expectations he never asked to carry. Dylan listens, offering validation without solutions, presence without pressure. This restraint is calculated, but it is also sincere. In a world of manipulation, sincerity becomes indistinguishable from strategy. Ivy watches this dynamic unfold with growing dread. The longer Dylan stays, the harder removal becomes without triggering consequences. She begins to understand that the true danger is not exposure, but entrenchment. Dylan is no longer an anomaly that can be expelled. Dylan is becoming part of the emotional infrastructure of the family. Once that happens, even revelation may not restore the balance Ivy seeks. The secret continues to fester, exerting pressure on every decision. Boardroom choices are delayed. Alliances shift subtly. Conversations are coded. The family's collective energy turns inward, defensive, reactive. This is the cost of buried truth. It consumes resources long before it ever becomes public. What no one anticipates, least of all Dylan, is the possibility that the secret may begin to change them as well. Power reshapes identity. The longer Dylan holds leverage, the more difficult it becomes to imagine relinquishing it. Survival evolves into entitlement. Entitlement hardens into expectation. And expectation, once disappointed, invites escalation. Ivy senses this shift and understands the final, terrible irony. By protecting the family from immediate scandal, she may be nurturing a far greater threat. Dylan no longer needs to expose the secret to cause damage. The damage is already underway, eroding trust, autonomy, and integrity from within. In The Bold and the Beautiful, this is how empires weaken. Not through sudden collapse, but through prolonged compromise. Dylan's refusal to leave Los Angeles marks not the climax, but the beginning of a slow-burning reckoning. Secrets do not remain static. They demand resolution, and when that resolution finally comes, it will not ask who intended harm. It will only ask who allowed it to happen. And when the truth finally surfaces, as it always does, the question will not be whether Dylan was right to stay, or whether Ivy was right to be afraid. The only question that will matter is how much of the Forrester and Spencer legacy will still be standing when silence is no longer an option.